Hello and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Here are today's top stories. Attorney General William Barr says left-wing radicals have hijacked peaceful protests following the death of George Floyd. NASA, with the help of SpaceX, launched 2 of its astronauts into lower Earth orbit. The launch had better weather last attempt. Canada is working with the Chinese military to develop a CCP virus vaccine. But its development begins human trials. One doctor is concerned for the safety of Canadian test subjects. A Hong Kong businessman appeals to President Trump via video letter. He's asking the U.S. to protect Hong Kong as it once protected West Berlin and to save Hong Kong's young protesters. And businesses that depend on college football to survive are worried about how to adjust if sports don't return to college towns soon. Riots and protests are unfolding across the U.S. following the death of George Floyd. Attorney General William Barr said what were peaceful protests have been hijacked by far-left extremists. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
Riots and protests have flared up recently in major cities like Portland, Oakland, New York City, and Minneapolis, where it all started after the death of George Floyd. Attorney General William Barr said today that far-left radicals have hijacked peaceful demonstrations.
In many places, it appears the violence is planned, organized, and driven by anarchic and left extremist groups, far-left extremist groups, using Antifa-like tactics, many of whom travel from outside the state to promote the violence.
Barr also assured that the officer charged with third-degree murder in the death of Floyd will be tried and justice will be served. Floyd died after he was arrested by an officer who held him down with a knee on his neck. But preliminary autopsy findings show that Floyd did not die from strangulation or traumatic oxygen deprivation. The report says Floyd died from a combination of heart disease and potential intoxicants which were aggravated during his arrest. Following his death, buildings have been burned down, stores have been looted, and federal officers assaulted by mobs, one even shot and killed. This morning, the governor of Minnesota called the situation there incredibly dangerous.
The situation is incredibly dangerous. The situation is fluid, it is dynamic, and there's already shots being fired back at our people. This arson that is taking place puts many people at risk.
He also said that he's mobilizing the state's National Guard to stop the riots. President Trump is now urging officials to get tougher on the rioters, adding that the military is ready and able if it's needed. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
It looks like second time was the charm for NASA and SpaceX. The 2 aerospace companies have successfully launched a pair of astronauts into orbit this afternoon. They'll reach the International Space Station tomorrow morning.
Ignition. Liftoff.
SpaceX launched 2 of NASA's astronauts into Earth's lower orbit on Saturday at 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time. The launch, called the Demonstration Mission 2, launched the Dragon crew with SpaceX's rocket Falcon 9. It's the first exclusively American space mission since 2011, 9 years ago. NASA's administrator, Jim Bridenstine, gave credit to his predecessor, along with President Trump, who said he is supporting NASA despite potential risks.
We have not had that kind of leadership for space in a very, very long time, and we're so grateful for it.
President Trump, who is now the 3rd sitting president to watch a launch from the Kennedy Space Center, commended NASA.
Those of us who saw the spectacular and unforgettable liftoff this afternoon watched more than an act of history. We watched an act of heroism.
Astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are now riding on the DRAGON2 spacecraft to the International Space Station. Their trip will take 19 hours. Their scheduled arrival at the ISS is at 10:27 a.m. Sunday.
An update on the global race to develop a CCP virus vaccine. A Canadian doctor is raising concerns over a vaccine candidate that was developed in partnership with Chinese military. That's as it enters phase 2 of human trials.
Canada's National Research Council has announced a collaboration initiative with Chinese company CanSino Biologics. They're working on clinical development of a possible new vaccine developed in partnership with the Chinese regime's military. Health Canada, the country's public health department, has approved the first human clinical trials. They're set to run at the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology at Dalhousie University. Dr. Kulvinder Gill is a Toronto-based medical doctor and president of grassroots nonprofit Concerned Ontario Doctors. She says she's worried about Canadians becoming test subjects of a vaccine developed in China.
We are the only country in the entire world that has chosen to partner with the Communist Chinese military, which is gravely concerning and it's frankly dangerous.
Dr. Gill's main concern are speed and lack of transparency. While normal vaccine development spans 10 to 15 years, CanSino moved into phase 2 human trials within a matter of weeks, without publishing any data from the first phase of trials. In recent years, China has been hit with several major vaccine scandals, one as recent as 2018, when hundreds of thousands of children were injected with faulty vaccines.
Their vaccine industry is tarnished. A reputation is now, they're trying to revive that by co-opting Canada's global reputation. And we can't allow that to happen because there's been so much devastation globally.
The concerns come after the Chinese regime hid information about human-to-human transmission of the CCP virus for at least several days and punished whistleblowers who tried to sound the alarm. Canadian Member of Parliament James Bazan signed an open letter calling for more accountability from the Chinese Communist regime over its handling of the virus.
Government of China needs to be open with the world and transparent about how this all came to be. It's the only way we're going to understand how we control the virus going forward. It's the only way that we're going to get to the bottom of developing a virus and a cure.
Dr. Gill says even if the vaccine was developed, the amount of manufacturing required could take 2 to 4 years. She also noted that previous virus outbreaks, like SARS and MERS, dissipated on their own without vaccine intervention. She adds that the same could happen with the CCP virus. NTD News, Toronto.
While most businesses across the U.S. remained shuttered amid the virus outbreak, one oyster farm in Northern California has kept busy.
Like many U.S. businesses, the Hog Island Oyster Farm in North California was devastated by the CCP virus. It's one of the largest oyster producers in the Tamaulipas Bay, but when the lockdown came, it was forced to furlough 90% of its 300 workers.
Never experienced anything like this, where we're just full-on operations on all levels and then having to close all the doors while we try to figure out how to deal with that kind of reaction. The effect on the business has been fairly devastating.
The oyster farm lost 2/3 of its business, but the owner had to keep a crew working to maintain the oyster crop. Otherwise, the quality of the crop would have been affected even after the lockdown was lifted.
If we can't get out there to do this work, one, we're going to lose some of them will die because they've been too crowded. They'll be misshapen.
With restaurants shut down for dining, Hog Island was forced to adapt. Their brand new Larkspur location, which opened in March, began with pickup and to-go orders. The company previously only shipped during holidays, but now it does it every week.
I'm extremely confident that we're going to come back strong and come back at a level that's going to be different. That ingenuity, that creativity, that enthusiasm, that passion is still there.
Sawyer hopes they'll be able to bring their staff back again as California reopens.
Coming up, in an emotional video, a Hong Kong entrepreneur is asking President Trump to save the young protesters of Hong Kong. He says these kids are the seeds of the new China. That and more when we return.
In the eyes of former acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, How has Judge Emmett Sullivan created a, quote, extrajudicial process in failing to dismiss the case against General Michael Flynn? Why does Whitaker believe the regulation establishing special counsels is deeply flawed? How does it threaten, quote, accountability to the chain of command? And how are Russia's very real attempts to interfere in U.S. elections often conflated with the now debunked claims of Trump-Russia collusion? And how is Communist China the far greater threat? In this episode, we sit down with former acting AG Matthew Whitaker, author of the new book, Above the Law, the inside story of how the Justice Department tried to subvert President Trump. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
China's northeast is on lockdown, but many residents are left in the dark. One local tells us what it's like. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us the story.
The northeastern Chinese city of Jilin has been under lockdown for 2 weeks. One resident called Miss Yang told us the situation there is becoming very serious. All restaurants are closed. Very few supermarkets are open. Some pharmacies are closed too. Anyone with a fever has to go to the hospital to get treatment. She says most people just stay at home now. They're very scared and life is hard.
Right now, the economy here is completely paralyzed, 90% of it. Everything is shut down, including most factories and businesses. Only state-owned factories are still open, but their production is cut in half.
She said many people are using up their savings and are not getting help from the authorities.
A lot of people lost their jobs and are running out of money. They're spending their savings like I am. Some people work from home, but not full-time. They're on a reduced salary, around $140 a month. No government subsidies, no free food from authorities. It's an impossible situation.
She said authorities aren't reporting the true situation.
They cleared out an entire hospital to make room for virus patients. Some other hospitals aren't accepting new patients at all. And there are lots of hotels designated for quarantine. Big buses are being used to bring people to quarantine centers. Authorities don't report the reality. If they did, the residents would panic.
President Trump announced he will move to end Hong Kong's special trade status with the U.S. Here's how American businesses in Hong Kong and residents there are reacting.
The American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong says President Trump's move to revoke Hong Kong's trade status is a blow to the city, though not entirely unexpected.
It's a difficult moment for all of us.
President Trump said this Friday his administration will begin the process of revoking Hong Kong's special trade status. The move comes after China passed a national security law that could put the city's freedom in jeopardy.
China has replaced its promised formula of one country, two systems with one country, one system. Therefore, I am directing my administration to begin the process of eliminating policy exemptions that give Hong Kong different and special treatment.
But the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong says not all businesses will rush to exit the city.
We need a lot more details on how this special status is going to unravel. It's not just like switching off a light switch. There are so many aspects of the U.S.-Hong Kong relationship that are special. We really have to see how it will work for understanding the impact to business.
One Hong Konger said he's not surprised about Trump's decision.
I know that he's going to do something about it for the past few days. I know, and we know that. But we have to go on.
Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong said Chinese leader Xi Jinping must bear the largest responsibility for the sanctions on Hong Kong.
Without the legislation of the national security law, I don't believe the world or the global community need to spend time to, when they need to deal with the pandemic, at the same time they will still put effort to impose any kind of sanction mechanism.
In Hong Kong, pro-Beijing politicians have criticized the U.S. for interfering with what they call China's domestic affairs. while some pro-democracy activists cheered the U.S. decision. They say it will punish Beijing for imposing legislation that threatens Hong Kong's liberty. Chinese officials were unusually quiet after the U.S. declaration. Beijing did not make an official announcement in the 24 hours following Trump's speech.
In a heartfelt video letter to President Trump, Hong Kong entrepreneur Robert Yuen is calling on Trump to grant visas for Hong Kong's young people. This as Chinese authorities push through a new law that many say will end Hong Kong's freedom.
It's been 1 year. Our people have been beaten, and then the Beijing gets involved, and there were secret military police coming to Hong Kong, doing all kinds of criminal things.
Robert Yuen has several companies in both Hong Kong and the U.S. He's the father of 2 Hong Kong politicians. He lived in the U.S. and China each for over 20 years and is known for his financial analysis. In a video, he appealed to President Trump to save the young people of Hong Kong.
Citizens, we all know the end of Hong Kong is near. These young kids are making a final stand, as in Dunkirk. They need your help.
China's new law would criminalize activities deemed as threats by Beijing. Critics say Beijing aims to retaliate against Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters who've been on the streets over the past year. More than 9,000 protesters have been arrested. Amnesty International says protesters are facing brutal beatings and torture in police detention. Yuen says it's unfortunate only these thousands of young people out of 1.4 billion Chinese have the courage to stand up and sacrifice for the universal values of the free world.
I quote, "Never in history has so much been done for so many by so few." Let me repeat. Never in history has so much been done for so many by so few. If your national resources allow, please protect Hong Kong as West Berlin. These kids are the seeds of a new China. They will be the true friends of your grandchildren.
In an interview with NTD's Hong Kong bureau, Yuen said the city might face a tough economic year ahead.
So there are $2-3 trillion US of money in Hong Kong will be on its way back to the United States. And this will affect the Hong Kong stock market and the Hong Kong dollars, and maybe even the RMB in Hong Kong. This will impact in a very, very powerful manner. And I believe all the Hong Kong people and the corrupted officials from China, they will be doing the same to liquidate all their assets, change into US dollars, and depart from Hong Kong.
Despite the impact on Hong Kong's economy, Yuen appealed to the U.S. to withdraw its investments in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a major gateway for China to attract foreign investment.
Hong Kong has become the largest money laundering center and the capital of the corrupted funds stolen by the corrupted Chinese officials. The CCP are staging a world-class deception to suck up trillions of US dollars, while dress Hong Kong up as an autonomous and legitimate city. Please recall your investment bankers from Hong Kong. Your US capital will be put into better use at home than to grow cancers in China and then spread to the rest of the world through the One Belt, One Road initiative. You should sanction all these communist entities from getting any more US capital.
Yuen said he believes the world loves Hong Kong and will help the city rise again.
To help Hong Kong to return to its former vibrance and glory. And we are getting old. So the future belongs to the young people. Thank you.
Reporting by Sarah Liang, NTD News.
Up next, we hear from a professor of medieval studies to see how plagues of the past compare with today's global pandemic. Find out what we discovered after the break.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
How did societies cope with plagues in the past? And how do they compare with the virus we're facing now? We talked to a professor of medieval history to find out.
One of the most notable plagues in history is the Black Death, which hit Europe in the 14th century. The Middle Ages lacked much of today's medical knowledge and quick communication. So how did people cope back then? Some examples are found in 14th century literature. Most notably, Giovanni Boccaccio's masterpiece, titled The Decameron.
And these are recorded quite widely. One is to just abandon everything and to turn yourself over to all sorts of sexual depravity. There's all sorts of discussions of merrymaking, of singing, of heavy drinking. But then the other hand is to turn towards absolute religious austerity, right?
No matter which path people chose, society carried on. But there's no doubt that the widespread destruction shook up normal life. And much like today, people were left searching for answers.
One of the main similarities is how we look to experts for some sort of solace, some sort of comfort. We rely now and in the past on doctors, physicians, medical treaties, scientists, even philosophers. We look for help from authorities, particularly from governments or those in positions of power.
Assistant Professor of Medieval Studies, Kristen Rennie, says it was common back then to look to priests for guidance. But he explains that wasn't always reliable either. That's because there are accounts of priests abandoning their duties in times of turmoil. Compare that with today.
Rely on the science. Every government's telling us to rely on the science, but it's worth pointing out that there's not just one science, right? There's not one singular scientific view, just like there is not one singular historical view of what happens or perspective of what's going on. But that authority is being questioned, and in many places it's being undermined, right? So again, I say there are cracks in society being exposed.
But if looking to authorities for answers wasn't always a dependable option, how did people find the strength to carry on? Rennie says this part is what's missing from historical accounts and stories of past plagues.
We don't have too many glimpses into the past of the kindness of others, the kindness of neighbors helping each other, the power of resiliency. That fundamental belief, I think, is no doubt. I can't confirm this, I can't back it up with solid evidence, but no doubt that universal religious belief inspired people to go on.
In the midst of today's pandemic, the question remains: how will each person internally cope to get past this? And how will it change our society? Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, high school seniors across the country are met with a huge setback as both proms and graduation ceremonies have been canceled. Hear them talk about their outlook for the future and more after the break. College town business owners that depend on crowds from football games to survive are worried there won't be a football season this year. The virus pandemic has decimated professional and college sports.
Business owners in college towns across America are facing a financially uncertain future. Without college football and the traffic it brings to local communities, these businesses are struggling. The CCP virus pandemic brought professional and college sports to a standstill. A Pennsylvania bar owner who normally welcomes fans of Penn State University's football team is worried about the stoppage.
So much of our business hinges on, these home football games.
Businesses are rethinking themselves so they can survive. Luke Chessie's bar normally holds 850 people watching games or who come in after a local game.
If we don't have those bodies to come in, or if we're restricted, then we have to figure out what we have to do as far as payroll goes, as far as our operation goes, and just trim everything down just so we can still be a viable business.
Athens, Georgia welcomed multitudes of out-of-town guests when the University of Georgia played a big game against Notre Dame last year.
The impact of college football on our community is astounding.
Bradley said during that time, the population of Athens more than doubled in size.
So just imagine what that does for the local economy, what that does to keep cash registers ringing.
But now the football season mostly hinges on whether campuses reopen to students.
If we wound up not having football, I really do believe that we probably have quite a few businesses that would have to shutter their doors.
The NCAA says student athletes can resume voluntary activities on campus as early as June 1st, if schools and local laws allow it. And this week, college football officials and TV networks extended a June 1st target for deciding the season's early game times.
High school seniors are bracing for an unpredictable future. Milestones like prom and graduation are getting canceled, and even college could go online. But there's some sweetness amid the uncertainty.
Many high school teens dream of a fairy tale prom night, but this year the pandemic's raining on their parade. It was hard to accept at first. Prom dance and graduation canceled.
We didn't want to admit that it wasn't going to happen, but deep down we knew. At least for me.
A photo op gave these girls a chance to get out in their evening gowns. Their minds turned to the future and what college could be like if it's all online.
As of right now, I think they're saying they're still starting in the fall, but obviously that could change. And it's just I don't want to go if I'm not going to get the full experience.
And yet, living without, they're learning to cherish the small things in life.
And I never would have thought anything like this would ever happen. And now that it has happened, I'm just never going to take anything for granted again. Literally.
To get through the many long, dull hours of lockdown, they're baking, exercising, and staying in touch on the phone for some sense of normalcy, the one that's tinged with uncertainty.
And that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.